And today I want to talk to you about shame and the role that shame plays in all of these relationships that we've had. First of all, shame is very much at the core of a narcissistic behavior. And when I look at the narcissists in my life, and I'm talking primarily of, there's basically four main narcissists in my life. It was my mother, my father, my brother, and my ex-husband. And my ex-husband is the only sociopath in the group. He came in and he was the catalyst because he activated the narcissism in my family and got them all to he saw their ability to scapegoat me. He saw their shame triggers and he triggered them. Families of origin here. There's my ex-husband's family of origin, my mother's, my father's, and my brother's, right? The one link, because they're all very different, but the one linking factor in them was shame. I can't see how my mother and my father were abused. I really can't, because my grandparents were lovely people, and really my mother's parents were the ones who loved me unconditionally. But I didn't know her father, so the one who I call grandfather was someone my grandmother married before I was born, but it was not the one who raised my mother. But my mother was ashamed of him, and she was also ashamed of her poverty. She was also ashamed of being raised by a single parent. She was ashamed of how poor they were. She was ashamed by the fact that her grandmother wasn't educated. She was ashamed by that they had a house that they rented, that she didn't ever own a house, that she didn't have store-bought clothes. You know, all these kinds of things were shame triggers for her. My father, on the other hand, had a family that looked very good on the outside, but this was the big one. He was very ashamed of his mother because she was morbidly obese. And he always had a thing about it was very cruel and harsh about overweight women, which, you know, became a trigger between my mother and I, and between my sister-in-law and I, because both my mother and my sister-in-law struggled with their weight, and I was thin. And so it became a source of resentment between them and me, a jealousy factor between them and me. And that sounds minor, but it's not minor. I mean, it could be something as petty as that, but it became big time important because that resentment and that resentment became a factor in a really aggressive abuse towards me, in an aggressiveness, in a cruelty towards me that they could justify, because in their minds I had it all, or I had, you know, something that they were, you know, just really, really envious of, and it felt really good to bring me down. And so, you know, I triggered a shame in them about that. My ex-husband was deeply ashamed of his family. In his mind, from the wrong side of the tracks, they were rough around the edges, they had kind of a bad reputation, they were just not who he wanted to be associated with. All these things that in his mind were shameful things that he saw me as a way of getting away from. That he could align himself with me, and then that would be a way of elevating himself socially, because I'd gone to college and my parents had been to college and all that kind of stuff. And so he aligned himself with me, and that was what I had to feed him narcissistic supply. That, and the fact that I was who I was, which was an empath and all these other things. Okay, then you have my parents, who now I have two narcissistic parents, and also another factor is, really no one's really talked about this, but you kind of wonder if how this would play in. My parents really were a big part of raising each other, because they met as teenagers. They met in I think sophomore and junior year of high school, and they've been together ever since. And so how they developed was together, and so it's possible that they affected a kind of narcissism in each other that that maybe makes sense why I don't see it in their parents necessarily. But it was it'd be kind of an interesting thing to think about, because both of my sons have had girlfriends with parents who were still married that were the most dysfunctional parents and dysfunctional families I have ever seen. Just really, really abusive, bad situations. And, you know, you assume there's some kind of health because they didn't go through any kind of divorce or anything, but I mean, there is a sickness keeping them together. And so, you know, there is no big assumptions to be made about families who necessarily stay together as being necessarily the best thing. There are some rare couples that is true for. My husband now, his parents have been together forever, and they are lovely. They're deeply in love, and they have very functional, healthy, happy relationship, and they, but it's, it's rare. So just the staying together means absolutely zero. And it could mean, more often than not, it seems to mean a codependency in a twisted and unhealthy sort of way. And my parents, it could be as simple as the fact that they can't be wrong. So if you get a divorce, that means there was a mistake or a weakness or something happened along the way, and you have to admit an error. You have to admit that something happened, that you didn't get it all right. And my parents are not prone to doing that. And their myth, their story together is they need each other to keep telling it. They need each other to keep telling it. The shame that my brother would have would be, I guess it would be similar to my own, but his is going to be more like, we all know the story. The risk of not continuing to tell the story was too great. I know that when we were little kids, and if he was being abused, I definitely always stood up for him, which was not something he did for me. So I'm not sure what it is about me that really, I've always really needed justice and kindness and things to line up. So, it may be, frankly, that my brother had even more awareness of my parents than I did. And there's conversations that he tried to have with me that I couldn't hear, I couldn't understand. Conversations he tried to have with me about my husband, about his wife, that I couldn't understand at the time when he was having them with me. Where it tells me that he did have a kind of insight that I didn't have, but that he was making the choice to go along with it. I didn't understand what he was saying, because that's not why I was there. I was there because I believed it. Whatever the story, what the story was, I believed. So I believed my ex's story. So my brother was coming to me and saying basically, that he saw through my ex's story and I couldn't hear it, or that, we all know how my parents are. We all know that's mom and dad. But he was going out, and I'm like, I don't know, how is that, like, I really didn't get it. So I did another video on why they hate you, and the reason that they hate you is because you see through their story, and you're confronting their false reality. And how with my ex-husband that was true, but how with my parents it wasn't even true. He was just telling him it was true, but I was perfectly. I believed absolutely that we were this family and that they would be there for me, and all. I believed that they were who I believed they were, and so when they weren't, it was a huge shock to me. But he was telling them that I knew all this stuff, and all this insight, that I had been talking to him about it, which wasn't true. But anyways, so I think shame is the unifying factor that I can see, even more so than abuse or specific kind of abuse, or necessarily identifying that their parents were also narcissists. The thing that I can definitely see as a link between people who become abusive and become this kind of a narcissistic abuse that's along a spectrum, because like I've said, my parents and my ex-husband were not the same. These were overt narcissists, and he was definitely a sociopath. So they manifested quite differently. But I believe that all of it was shame-based. The codependent is also somewhat shame-based. So that's probably where the link is. And it also is the place where compassion can come from. And I've done another video on, do we need to forgive the narcissist? And my position on that is that it's not forgiveness that we need. They don't care about that. But for our own healing, we can offer them compassion. And that's really what my channel is about. My channel really is about offering ourselves compassion, offering compassion to heal from this whole situation. And that compassion really is the key to ending this kind of abuse. And if we can identify compassion in relationships and make that a value and an ethic that we all can hold dear, then we could get away from narcissistic abuse, and we could also heal the shame. So, all right, you guys, thanks a lot for listening, and please give me a thumbs up and tell me what you know about shame and how this lines up with what you've learned about narcissistic abuse. All right, thanks a lot. I'll talk with you later. Bye-bye.